Welcome to Shameless Leadership. I'm your host, Sarah Dean. This show is for women leaders who are committed to advancing both their own leadership and the leadership of those around them. In each episode, I offer practical strategies and inspiring stories to help you become a more confident, compassionate, and curious leader. The truth is, you were born to lead. So let's start now, together. Hello, Shameless Leaders. Today we're talking about executive presence. And I'm excited to dig into this because I feel like there's some myths and some misnomers and some confusion. And I think when we talk about executive presence, different people define it differently. And I think that there's differences in between how genders define executive presence. And so I think it would be helpful to take a little bit of a closer look into what is executive presence, what is not executive presence, where do we go wrong, making some assumptions about maybe what we think it should be. We also are going to look at why it matters and what components matter most in terms of advancing and developing your executive presence. And we're going to talk specifically about how to build it. So I'm excited to dig into this, and I'll let you know in advance, right from the jump here, I'm feeling a little salty about this because I've had some clients come to me, some coaching clients come to me recently and talk about how they've had leaders, specifically male leaders, talk to them about male leaders talking to them as females, specifically about what they need to develop in order to build their executive presence. And some of it has been so off base and sexist. And so as I've heard a few more things, especially in recent weeks, I'm like, I need to talk about this. And like, we need to have like a real open conversation here, like real transparent about what some of the things are that are happening that are really undermining what executive presence is. And in the process of undermining what it is, also upholding bias, also upholding misogyny, also upholding other kinds of discrimination that none of us want to be a part of. If you're listening to this show, you don't want to be a part of that. So let's dive in. We're going to be talking about a handful of things today. And I want to just start with sometimes I think where we start with executive presence is what we think it might be, and the assumptions and this kind of like some of the generalizations that we make about executive presence are that it's about being able to command a room, and it's about being loud, and it's about being dominating or being able to have power over a room or a team, being able to have your voice heard, being able to get your opinion out there. And that's not what executive presence is. Executive presence is, like get your ideas out there, but not by being the loudest, most dominating person in the room, or by being commanding, or, letting people know how it's going to be done. Really what executive presence is being able to have a commanding presence without being commanding. How can you lead in a way that other people naturally want to follow you? That's executive presence, that people are automatically attracted to your energy and the direction that you're going, and they want to be a part of it and they want to be on your team, but not because you're just like bossing them around and telling them that they need to get in line. So let's talk about where we get some things wrong here to start. So first things, and I think it's important to acknowledge also that so many people are being put into leadership roles right now where they have highly developed skill sets, but they don't have highly developed leadership skill sets. So as we've seen turnover in companies, and as we've seen layoffs in companies and reorgs and just so many things happening. We've seen this since 2020, but we're seeing it right now as we've navigated a lot of layoffs recently, especially in tech. Well, I shouldn't say especially in tech. It's been in so many different spaces. I'm prone to think of tech because I'm in Seattle, where there's a lot of tech, and also my husband is one of the tech layoffs. So that's very top of mind for me. But what we're seeing is a lot of people being moved into leadership roles who are highly qualified by their skills in their job, but they don't have a lot of leadership experience. And that's where I think we are letting some misconceptions about executive presence run wild in our attempt to almost desperately develop leaders at a really rapid pace, because we need leaders in certain positions in order to get things done and for companies to continue to move at a certain pace, even though they're like moving with smaller teams, or leaders in place who've never led before, but now suddenly have a team of 15 that they need to be in charge of and they need to command control of. And so we're seeing these kind of wonky variables and situations where it's easy to, in a moment of haste, make assumptions about what executive presence is and about what leaders should and should not be doing. And I think we're getting in our own way a little bit. So let's dig into what it is, what it's not. So when we are looking at executive presence, some of the things that we're getting wrong right now is that we are equating executive presence with being polished over being someone who has substance behind them. And so executive presence is about being poised, yes, and we're going to get into that, but it's not necessarily about being super polished. And I've had coaching calls recently with some folks and leaders in leadership roles who talk about like being new in a leadership role and trying to be so buttoned up and like getting everything just so perfectly because they were nervous and they wanted to get it right. And they were, practically reading from a script as they were going through their day-to-day work and their day-to-day leadership opportunities, because they didn't quite know what they were doing and they wanted to look the part. So they were overly polished, but there wasn't a lot of substance behind that. And not that they weren't skilled, but they didn't have the confidence that they needed. They didn't have the adaptability and adaptivity and nimbleness that they needed as leaders in order to be able to be in a space and be a little bit more relaxed in order to navigate the space in a way that's not just comfortable for them as a leader, but that also makes other people around them comfortable. So the misconception here is that like leaders should look a certain way and be polished in a certain way and speak a certain way, and that equals executive presence. And no, it doesn't. That equals playing a part. Like that equals playing dress up in a lot of cases. So the reality is that true executive presence isn't about what you look like. Now you need to, dress professionally, and you need to be you need to have the composure and the poise that we're going to talk about later in order to be in the role. But it's not about like having the suit that's the right color and button the same way and having the right shoes, or for men or for women or for non-binary people. It's not about like dressing a certain way or speaking with a certain level of eloquence. It's really about how do you make people feel when they're around you? How do you handle pressure? How do people around you want to be with you when you handle pressure? And then how do you communicate effectively? And you can do that in ways that are not polished at all. Sometimes it can be about being human and being vulnerable, and sometimes even being messy and scrappy. That is the substance that can be actually really significant and important in executive presence that matters way more than being polished. The next thing where we go wrong is that we assume that executive presence is innate or unteachable, that it's like this thing that like you're born with like this certain kind of the charisma for it. And that's not true. That can absolutely be learned. Leadership is learned. You are not born a leader. Now, some people are born with certain traits that allow leadership to come more naturally to them, but everyone can develop leadership skills. Everyone can develop their executive presence. This is not about being naturally born to do something or fill a certain role. So executive presence is a set of skills, and skills are developable. And so this includes things like emotional intelligence and strategic communication and self-awareness, which is where we go so wrong. And we'll dig into that more in a bit. But self-awareness that can be practiced and developed over time, like muscles, where we practice them and we get stronger and we get more connected to what we're doing. And that helps us continue to grow and be able to show up in more powerful ways moving forward. And not powerful by having power over people, but powerful in terms of knowing how we can have impact and influence in ways that support us and the people around us and the outcomes that we want to get. So there's a lot of people who don't have self-awareness, who don't have the emotional intelligence, who aren't able to communicate strategically, who are in leadership roles, and they're complaining about the people around them who show up with different levels of higher levels of humanity in many cases. And they're saying, well, we like this person over here, like showing emotion in the workplace, like that's not executive presence. Or this person over here, like, wearing this kind of an outfit or having their hair a certain way, that's not executive presence. The leaders that are saying that are trying to make the definition of executive presence be a very specific, narrow mold, they're not the ones that have executive presence. They are the ones that have a bias for things being a certain way, and they don't like it when people don't fit their mold, or they don't like it when people challenge them or challenge the status quo or make them feel uncomfortable, if not threatened. So be really clear on when you hear leaders challenging someone else's executive presence by calling out the way their hair looks or the way that they dress or how they said a certain thing, as long as they weren't saying something harmful. But like if they said something and they're like, oh, I don't know, that person kind of rambled on a bit, or that person, they were tearing up when they were talking about that, like showing emotion or not be, maybe giving an elaborate explanation of something is not a lack of executive presence. And those who try to challenge some of those pieces where people are showing up with humanity, they're lacking their own executive presence and they are misinformed about what this really is. So the other thing that we get wrong is that we associate executive presence with dominant personalities. So just because someone has power does not mean they have executive presence. And so when we look at, and when you're looking at how to develop your own executive presence, please, please, please consider who you are paying attention to. Look at the people that you want to be like. Also, look at the people you don't want to be like. Give yourself permission to identify, I want this and not that this works and that doesn't. So someone who maybe has had a lot of success, but has had success by dominating others, that's probably not the success that you want to have if you're a values-led leader, which I know many of our listeners here are. Like, we don't want to have power and we don't want to have success by dominating or deceiving other people. We don't want to have power by gaining power because other people have lost. So looking at this misconception that you don't have to be the loudest in the room, the most extroverted, you don't have to be alpha. I can't stand that word. Sorry, Gen Alpha. You don't have to be alpha. You don't need to be the top dog in the room. That's not executive presence. That's posturing. So the reality is that quiet confidence goes a really long way, that active listening and showing your heart and demonstrating that you see, hear, understand, and value someone, that goes a long way. Having calm authority goes a really long way. Those are all equally powerful and sometimes much more effective in demonstrating executive leadership or executive presence and building your own inclusive leadership skills in various work settings. So think about the people that you watch navigating. And sometimes these kinds of leaders are flying under the radar, these calm authority leaders, quiet confidence leaders who are actively listening. They're taking everything in. They're super observant. They are like quietly, strategically making moves. And notice what they're doing, because they're often doing a lot more than you think. And they're often doing a lot more than the loudest person in the room who's just trying to take up space and be seen all the time. The next thing that we get wrong is that we conflate executive presence with assimilation, that you need to fit in a certain way, that you need to fit a certain mold, that you need to behave or fit into like dominant cultures in order to look the part or in order to be the part. And that there's certain norms that we need to follow. And the reality is that when we only have conformity and we don't allow for creativity and diversity in leadership and in the ways that we let people lead, then everyone suffers. So we want authenticity, not conformity. How can we have leaders who are showing up authentically and demonstrating their leadership skills in ways that only they can do it, that they're adding their own secret sauce in? When we compare that authenticity with intention and clarity and strategy and insight and self-awareness, then we have these multiple layers of components that really can drive executive presence that can be extremely powerful and extremely effective. And then the last thing that we get wrong with executive presence is that we use it as a bias for gatekeeping. So when we tell people that executive presence looks like a certain thing, that it's this and not that, and we have kind of these norms around it, and we have conformity around it, or we have certain cultural components to it, we very highly run the risk of upholding bias and keeping loud white male extroverts in leadership roles at the expense of women, people of color, people with disabilities, people with neurodivergence, introverts, at the expense of all these other people that we really, really need in these roles. So we need to be looking at how can we redefine or expand our vision of what executive presence is and be really careful about the assumptions that we make and the molds that we try to shove people into when it comes to leading and trying to model and mentor in the space of executive leadership and executive presence in leadership. So what are the pieces that are important then? So if we know like where we're getting this wrong, then what are the pieces that are important and what are the things that we need to actually be focusing on? So when you are looking at advancing your executive presence, here are the things that you can do. We're going to talk about 7 things. So the first thing is poise. You can work on your ability to project confidence and composure and decisiveness. You can look at how you uphold these things in high-stakes situations. So how do you uphold your composure in a high-stakes situation? How do you maintain your confidence in a high-stakes situation? This still allows plenty of space to be imperfect, to be vulnerable, to get things wrong, to be a little messy, to be scrappy, to like force yourself to be resilient and resourceful. So poise is not about having it figured out and having it be all buttoned up and knowing exactly what you're doing next. Poise is about, I can step into any space and figure it out as I go, right? Now, hopefully sometimes we, have some strategy and we know what we're going to do when we go into a space, but I can step into a space. I can have a plan. If the plan goes sideways, I can figure it out from there. Like I have that confidence and that composure that I know that I deserve to be there. I know that I deserve to take up space here. I know that my voice has value and I'm going to behave in a way that demonstrates that. There is a kid who plays in my son's little league. So not on my son's team, but we've played their team a couple times now. And this kid has poise and swagger and confidence. And every time I see him play, I'm like, I want to live in his body for one day of my life. No matter what he is doing in the dugout, out in outfield, behind home plate, up batting, he has this confidence that is like, you can just see it. You can smell it. It is like a mile away. And every parent, we talk about him, we're like, here he comes. Like all of us just want to live as this kid for one day of our lives. Because he can just be standing waiting to see if a ball is going to come to left field. And he still is like the most confident kid you've ever seen in a ballpark. Like it's just amazing. So this is poise. This is that like whenever I walk into a room, I know I can figure it out. I got it. And no one can tell me otherwise. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to be humble and be open to like correction or open to making a mistake and apologizing if I need to. But that I'm rolling in with like my I got it energy. I got it. I'm good. I'm here to own my space. I'm here to take up space. That's poise. Next is communication. So communication is speaking clearly and concisely and compellingly, actively listening to others, adapting your message to your audience. So being able to speak to an audience and see them for who they are. So meeting your audience where they're at, recognizing like, hey, if this is a room of mostly females, I'm going to talk to them in one way. If this is a room of a mixed gender room, I'm going to talk to them in another way. If this is a room of, people with whatever different needs, I'm going to talk to them in this way. So meeting people where they're at. If this is a room of people who I know are going through something rough right now, I'm going to talk to them a certain way, right? So meeting the moment with your communication, not just being rote and routine in all your communication, using language and tone that are appropriate for the moment, but also that call people in and make people want to listen and engage with you. So this communication is really a huge part of how we attract people in with us, right? And so I know when I'm working on executive presence in a new room of people, going around the room, and like I just did this a couple of weeks ago at a speaking engagement. I got into the room 30 minutes before my session was going to start, and I went in. There was a bunch of people just sitting kind of randomly in chairs, like scrolling on phones and stuff, and not talking to people. And I went and like introduced myself to every single person. I asked how they were doing. I was like, hey, what other sessions have you been at today? My executive presence in that room was getting to know people as individuals before I took the stage. Because that then allowed me to, when I took the stage, have a sense of who I was talking to and how I could meet them where they're at. So that's part of communication too. It's not just about like being able to speak up in a room full of strangers. It's about how do you get to know that room full of strangers a little bit in order to meet them where they're at. Next is appearance. So appearance is not about looking a certain way, fitting a certain mold. It's not about style or fashion and having like the best, most expensive clothes at all. It is about showing up in a way that is authentic to you, that's polished in the right way for you to be in the environment in a way that is not, I guess, I hesitate to say distracting to other people because you can't control who's distracted by your clothes, but that like people aren't going to be harmed or offended by what you're wearing. And again, you can't always control this, but that you are showing up in a way where the energy that you're people are attracted to the energy that you're exuding. They're attracted to they're wanting to engage with you. Now, I show up in bright colors all the time. I intentionally, when I'm speaking in an event, will wear something that stands out because I want other people who've seen me speak, if they want to find me later in the day at the event, I want them to be like, oh yeah, she was wearing the pink shirt. Or, oh yeah, she was wearing the thing with flowers. Or, oh yeah, she was wearing those like striped shoes. So I will intentionally wear things that are loud so that people can find me easily if they're looking for me when I'm at an event. So it's not about like blending in, but it's about having an appearance where like it's appropriate for the environment. And that can look like 1 million different things. So having it be aligned with how you're going to be comfortable, how you can be in the space and take up the space you want to take up. And then how is it also aligned with your leadership brand? Next is emotional intelligence. So how are you advancing your emotional intelligence? And this part is so important. How are you reading the room, managing your emotions, responding to other people's emotions with empathy and self-regulation? These pieces are so significant. And this is where I think that we just are lacking in so many ways. And the people who are judgy, especially judgy about women's executive presence, are typically males who lack emotional intelligence. So just putting that out there, it's males who lack self-awareness and emotional intelligence who are often judging women's executive presence. Next is credibility. So how are you demonstrating credibility, expertise, reliability, integrity, and doing this really consistently over time? So how are you doing the things that you say you're going to do? How are you showing up when you say you're going to show up? How are you having that be part of your brand? Because that does develop credibility, and credibility is a significant part of your executive presence. Next is being values aligned. So knowing what your values are and then demonstrating them time and time again in any situation that you're in. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not imperfect and you don't make mistakes sometimes or make questionable choices, but that you know your values, you have an established leadership brand, and that you're consistently upholding the values of that leadership brand. And then the last piece of developing that executive the last rule of a component of your executive presence is going to be to have an understanding of humble power. So this is the opposite of dominant power. Having an understanding of humble power. When I have strong executive presence, I am not there to take up the most space in the room, to be the loudest one in the room. I have humble power, which means that I know how to work in a room in order to strategically get what I want that's going to not just serve me, but serve the other people in the room, especially the other people in the room who need my services the most. And do it in a way where I'm not demonstrating power over others, I'm demonstrating power with others, so that at the end of my time with them, they want to come along beside me. So this is not about being ego-driven. It's being able to make mistakes, be humble, being able to apologize, not trying to dominate, not needing to always be right, not leveraging your power at the exclusion of others, but instead leveraging your power to bring other people with you. So how can we develop this? What are the things that you can be practicing over time? You can be practicing knowing and upholding your leadership brand. So identifying your brand values and then practicing those over time. And that takes time for sure to decide, like, these are my 4 or my 5 leadership values, and here's how I implement them in all these different settings and environments. Knowing what you want to be known for, and then aligning your words, your actions, and your choices alongside what you want to be known for. Next is communicating with intention. This isn't just about speaking, but as we mentioned before, it's about tone of voice. It's about body language. It's about using data and storytelling to support your points. It's about slowing down and using pauses effectively. It's also about knowing authentic ways to connect genuinely with other people. Being a people person. That doesn't mean you need to be an extreme extrovert, but you can be a people person by figuring out what are the ways that you can communicate genuinely with other people in order to help them feel seen, heard, held, and valued. And anyone listening to the show is going to do it differently than I do it. We all do this differently in our lives. So what are your authentic ways of connecting genuinely with other people? And then how are you doing that on a regular basis? Next is developing poise through building your confidence in your self-worth. Building poise comes through advancing confidence. If I'm confident, I can be wearing the ugliest outfit in the room and not care. If I'm confident, I can not know the answer to something and know that that's okay, and that I can be resourceful in order to figure it out. If I am confident and I know my worth, I can ask for help. I can reach out to others. I can be scrappy. I can speak up, even if I'm not 100% sure of what I'm going to say or how I'm going to say it. I can trust that I'm a person who can figure things out as I'm going, right? So building confidence and self-worth are going to go so far in helping you build poise. So poise is not about like getting the cute clothes. Now, if wearing the cute clothes helps your confidence, go get the cute clothes. I definitely buy the cute clothes sometimes because I want to feel good. But it's really about advancing your confidence and self-worth to get that poise. Next is seeking feedback and observing others. So we talked a little bit about this, like noticing, hey, look at how that person's leading in comparison or contrast to how this other person's leading. I want to be more of that and less of that. We've probably all been in situations where we hear someone say something to a direct report or to someone around them, and you're like, oh my gosh, I never want to sound that way. I remember when I worked my first job out of college, I worked in a hospital environment with kids, and I had a colleague who routinely talked to the kids in the most awful tone of voice. And I just constantly was like, I just never want to sound like her. Like, I just never want to take that tone. And there'd be times where I would get frustrated with the kids or annoyed or overwhelmed or just exhausted. But I tried to be, and I didn't always get it perfect, but I tried to be really conscientious of my tone. And it was so helpful to have that other colleague who did not get this right a lot of times to be like, I don't ever want to sound like that. So really paying attention to like, I want to do it this way and not that way. And having those specific examples can be really, really helpful. Asking for feedback, which is so hard because receiving feedback can be hard, but asking for feedback in order to get better. So asking a trusted colleague or a mentor, like, hey, I'm really working on this. Can you do what words of advice or what are you noticing? Do you see areas of growth for me? Also seeking feedback from yourself by recording and reviewing. So if you have to present something, if you have to get up in front of people and speak about something, record yourself saying it, record yourself doing the thing, and then watch. And I will tell you, it's ridiculously uncomfortable and also really, really valuable. I hate going back and listening to podcast episodes or watching myself on video, but I also learn a lot about like, oh gosh, I need to slow down there, or I need to take more pauses, or I need to, do this and not that. So it's really, really helpful. Next is to strengthen your self-awareness in order to identify what are some of the things that trigger you? What are some of the things that put you into a state of panic or freeze? What are some of the areas where you maybe have some learning to do? And there's maybe areas where you're like, oh, I have a gap here and I can see how that's negatively impacting how I show up for others or how I, perform in different ways. How are you practicing managing emotions, emotional regulation, and managing reactions, especially in time of stress? I'm a really visibly reactive person. You will always know if I'm like happy, sad, mad, whatever. Like I just have a very hard time masking feelings. And it is a constant war within myself to withhold emotion in moments that I need to. And I find myself when my son is playing baseball, I have to be so careful. And it is so hard for me. When the kids are, if any kid gets up and has like a really rough at bat, I am so disappointed with the kid. Like I can see the kid feels really defeated and I'm like, oh, but like if I groan out loud to that kid, it seems like I'm upset that they didn't perform well. And so I'm constantly like, don't have a reaction, even though I'm like, oh, poor Alex, I feel so bad for him, but I'm like, don't groan. Like he's going to interpret your groan differently than you intend. And that's going to make him feel 1,000,000 times worse. So don't be the mom who's groaning when the poor kid has a rough time at that. So managing your reactions so that you're not misleading other people or making situations worse. And instead you're able to think through what's the best way for me to react in this moment and then react that way versus having like a knee-jerk reaction and then being like, oh shoot, I can't take that back. Also being able to cultivate mindfulness and stay in a moment and stay present in a moment rather than jumping 5 steps ahead and going into, some sort of other kind of hyper-reactive place, being able to stay proactive in the moment. And then last is leading with empathy and inclusion. So executive presence is about leading with empathy and inclusion, which is what's so funny to me about people who are really harsh and judgmental about executive leadership or executive presence, where they're like, oh, if you have good executive presence, you really should not you shouldn't show emotion. You should never tear up in front of your peers or your colleagues or anyone. And instead, the right thing to say would be, oh, I'm noticing that you are tearing up. It looks like you're having an emotional response. Is there something I can do to help you? It looks like you're having a response to this. Do you want to talk about it? Being in the moment, acknowledging what the moment is and demonstrating empathy. I can tell this is really hard for you. I would love to sit in this moment with you. I'd be happy to stay here with you. Let's talk it through. Let's figure it out together. So leading with empathy is part of executive presence that a lot of leaders who are in that dominating group of leaders just completely miss the mark on. And they probably would laugh in my face when I said, oh, you should have empathy, because there's also a whole slew of leaders that don't think empathy is important or valuable. And when we look at the science and the data and what actually helps build trust, grow teams, and impact outcomes most positively, it's being able to show up and demonstrate empathy, especially in high stakes, tough moments. So how are you balancing confidence with humility? How are you balancing getting out what you need to get out, being firm in the ways that you need to be firm, but also having empathy so that everyone still feels like they are an important part of what's happening? How are you inviting diverse perspectives and crediting others and keeping the door open for conversations so that you can always be learning? That's all part of that empathetic executive presence. So I hope this was helpful. We covered a lot today. I didn't get as sassy as I thought I might. So I hope that this was helpful, though, in terms of you thinking through how you can develop your executive presence. And then especially for you to look and see who are the people that are doing this in ways that you would value from emulating. It doesn't mean that you go and copy and try to clone yourself as someone else, but it does mean that you look and see hey, I want to model myself after someone that does it in this way. And how can we learn from those kinds of models rather than people who are telling us we're doing it wrong, but they're not modeling anything that we actually want to do? I hope this was helpful. Thank you for being here. I can't wait to be back with you next week. And until then, know that I am in this with you always. Thank you for allowing me to spend time in your ear today. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe to this channel. To learn more about my speaking, training, and coaching services, visit sarahdean.com. That's SARADEAN. I would also love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn at sarahdean.com/LinkedIn or on Instagram at sarahdeanspeaks. I love hearing from my listeners. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding space for you today and every single day.